What is the darkest thing you've ever read? I don't mean the most violent or gruesome or even the saddest. I mean specifically darkest. For me, the answer is The Crow by James O'Barr, because real darkness doesn't come from fantasy, but reality. And while on its surface, The Crow is a fantasy, the story of a man who comes back from the dead in search of brutal, bloody revenge, much of the book is drawn from the tragic true story of the man who created it. And once you know this story, it gives the book a new, almost haunted aspect. Because despite becoming massively popular, despite shifting the landscape of both indie comics and pop culture, despite turning into a movie that would be surrounded by its own tragedy, The Crow wasn't even written with publication in mind, but as a form of art therapy, a failed attempt at emotional release for a troubled man trying to escape his own demons. James O'Barr doesn't know his own birthday. A few days after he was born, when CPS came to his mother's trailer home to take him away, she was too drunk to remember when she had given birth. Young James was left to fend for himself in Detroit's orphanage and foster care system, and he learned that his best method for survival was to stay far away from others. As he churned through various orphanages and foster homes, he turned into a loner. His sole companion through it all was his drawing. The coloring books that were tossed his way had already been ruined and scribbled over, so he made his own drawings on the back. Art would be his lifeline. At age 7, James was finally adopted, but things didn't get much better. Both of his parents worked long hours and would leave James at the movie theater. We'd watch the same movies over and over. But he would dissect how they worked and began absorbing the language of cinema. Beyond movies, O'Barr's other source of comfort was his discovery of comics. He got no allowance, so he'd skip lunch for days to save up enough money to buy his comics at the end of the week. He had no interest in superheroes, but obsessed over Creepy, Eerie, and the other black and white titles that were more violent than the color books. O'Barr grew into an angry young man, bitter at the hand that life had dealt him. But in high school, a ray of light pierced the darkness. A classmate named Bethany. She was his opposite, pure positivity that balanced his negativity. They began dating, and he began to heal. He felt that Bethany was the reward for surviving the 17-year endurance test that had been his life. He moved in with her, finally escaping his home, and soon after, they were engaged. I'll quote O'Barr for what happened next. I was a careless teenager who hadn't paid his car insurance. The local cops knew my car on site, so I phoned Bethany and said, "Sweetie, why don't you pick me up? I really can't afford another ticket right now." On her way to her car to pick me up, she was run down by a drunk driver, killed on the spot. But in my mind, I was responsible. If only I'd paid my car insurance. If only I'd waited 10 more minutes to call. If only I'd said, "I'll just see you tomorrow, pumpkin." If. There was nothing in my future but nothingness. To flee the pain of Bethany's loss, O'Barr joined the Marines. They stationed him in Berlin, and when they learned of his artistic abilities, they assigned him the job of redrawing combat manuals. One such manual was on the disposal of corpses. They drop off a shoebox of graphic photos for him to censor and redraw, perhaps good preparation for The Crow. But in Berlin, his downward spiral only continued. He spent his free time drinking, doing drugs, and getting into fights. It seemed as if his life was racing towards a sad, early end. But it was also in Berlin where O'Barr discovered something that would change his life: the music of Joy Division. Listening to Joy Division, O'Barr finally felt for the first time that someone understood him. That mixture of love and loss, of pain, hate, anger, and romance, it made O'Barr feel less alone. Art would be his means of survival. Inspired, O'Barr began his own artistic work to give vent to his feelings, to try and wail onto the page the same way Curtis did for Joy Division. And so, The Crow was born. We'll look at the comic itself in a few minutes, because for now, O'Barr wasn't showing it to anyone. Making this comic was a chance for him to wrestle with his demons, to express things in his art that he couldn't with his words. But in many ways, this experience wasn't healing. It only brought those feelings to the surface, only focused and enhanced his anger. After his father passed away, O'Barr was discharged from the Marines and sent back to Detroit. He returned intent on killing the driver who'd killed Bethany, only to find out that he'd already died. He would have to settle for getting vengeance in the pages of his comic. He got a job working on cars, and while he was still drinking, using drugs, and getting into fights, for a few hours each night, he would work on The Crow. As his artistic abilities improved, he sold a few stories and illustrations to other publishers, but refused to take work on superhero books to pay the bills. When Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles launched the black and white comic boom, O'Barr sent samples of The Crow to all these new indie publishers, but they all turned him down. It was too dark, too violent, too weird. But that didn't bother him. It didn't stop him. The Crow wasn't for the world, it was for him. At least, that was the plan. By the late 80s, O'Barr had settled into something like a comfortable existence. Working at the body shop, getting into bar fights, doing drugs, and chipping away at The Crow. To help make extra money, he painted t-shirts that he sold at his local comic shop. It would have been easy for him to keep going down this path, to meet a dark end, and for The Crow to be lost to time. But fate, it seems, had other plans. In 1988, the boom of black and white indie comics had gone bust. But during that bust, Gary Reed, the owner of O'Barr's local comic shop, wanted to keep publishing some of the books by the local artists who'd lost their publishers. He cleared out a storage room in the back of his comic shop, and Caliber Comics was born. But Reed had a problem. The web press used for printing comics at the time required 5 comics to be printed at once, and Reed only had 4. So one day, when O'Barr came in to drop off some t-shirts, Reed asked if he had any ideas for comics that might be a fit for his new publishing company. So late one night, O'Barr shows up at Reed's door. Sitting on the back porch, chain-smoking cigarettes, O'Barr shows him the first few pages of The Crow. And, unlike every other publisher who'd seen it and been scared away, Reed agrees to publish it. But O'Barr is an unknown, so Reed only prints 5,000 copies, half of what he was doing for Caliber's top titles. Still, when O'Barr walks into the back of the comic shop and sees 10 boxes of The Crow #1, it seems crazy. There couldn't possibly be that many people interested in reading his dark, violent love letter. O'Barr would turn out to be quite wrong on that front, but before we get to that and all of his triumphs and tragedies in Hollywood, let's finally take a look at the comic itself, because it might not be exactly what you're expecting. Maybe you're expecting a grim tale of brutal, bloody, uncompromising revenge by a guy in crazy makeup pirouetting through the air before slicing people open with a samurai sword. And that is absolutely in there. But if that's all The Crow was, I don't think we'd still be talking about it today. Overly grim and violent revenge tales have been commonplace for a while. No, when I said The Crow was the darkest comic I ever read, I meant that very specifically, because darkness, by its very nature, implies the existence of light. And what makes The Crow so dark is the blindingly bright light at the center of this book. See, a surprising amount of the book is given over to sequences of Eric and Shelley's relationship before the tragedy that inspires Eric's revenge. And these scenes are depicted with incredible tenderness and lyricism. There's so much honesty in these moments that I'm fairly certain these are just autobiographical moments for O'Barr, moments from his time with Bethany before the drunk driver killed her. He even visually based Shelley on Bethany. I can only imagine the pain of actually creating this work, of taking your most beautiful memories with a person who has passed and trying to capture them in ink before they fade from your mind forever. But just as it does in real life, reality intrudes on these idealized moments. They break apart as Eric realizes that Shelley is gone and he's alone in their apartment. The white negative space in the page is filled with blackness. Unlike almost every other revenge story, this doesn't feel cheesy, manipulative, or perfunctory. It feels raw, truthful, and real. And it's equally real when, moments later, the book erupts into violent mayhem, the gleeful dismembering and torturing of bad people. This is real rage on the page, the anger of a man who'd spent years drawing dead and dismembered soldiers, finally taking pen and ink revenge on the world that he couldn't take in real life. The book works like a silhouette, the dark parts making the bright seem brighter, the light parts making the dark darker. But this duality, the silhouette effect, isn't just in the art. It's embedded in the very narrative structure itself. Unlike most revenge narratives, O'Barr doesn't place the tragedy at the beginning of the story, allowing us to grit our teeth through it and then enjoy the rest of the ride. Instead, the revenge story and love story move in parallel, approaching both ultimate revenge and ultimate tragedy in lockstep. We are trapped, in Eric's mind and in O'Barr's mind. Every step we get closer to revenge, to catharsis, to release, is a step we take closer to reliving the tragedy in all its brutal, unflinching agony. This book isn't a power fantasy, it's an endurance test. It's an allegorical depiction of the flood of emotions after the sudden loss of a loved one, perhaps the most potent such depiction ever captured. And somehow this dark, personal, twisted love letter to a dead fiancé was about to transform pop culture. As you guys can probably tell, I try to do really extensive research for these videos, and I've learned through that process just how frighteningly difficult it can be to find accurate, complete, and unbiased information online. Well, that's where today's sponsor Ground News comes into play. I was so excited when they reached out and wanted to sponsor this channel because Ground News is my go-to website and app to stay fully informed on the topics that matter most to me. Let me show you how it works. Here's the story from Marvel's trailer for Agatha All Along featuring Kathryn Hahn and Aubrey Plaza. Ground News gives me a quick summary of the topic and lists all the publications covering it, organized by left, right, and center, as well as sorting them by factuality and corporate ownership. Personally, I always try to read articles from multiple outlets with varying points of view. I also like to look over here and find what outlet broke the story first, so I can be sure to read that article and support the journalists who are doing the legwork breaking stories. And if you sign up for the Vantage plan through my link ground.news/matt with 4Ts, you get access to one of my favorite features, the blind spot feed. Most algorithms tend to feed you stories that match your existing political viewpoints, so it's easy to miss out on crucial information. But Ground News' blind spot feed shows you all the stories that you might be missing from your other feeds. Ground News makes it incredibly easy to stay fully informed on anything from entertainment to the 2024 election and to see the bigger picture. So check them out at ground.news/matttt or scan my QR code to save 40% on the same Vantage plan I use for unlimited access to all of their features. All 5,000 copies of The Crow #1 sold out. As O'Barr published issues 2 and 3, Caliber had to keep reprinting issue 1 to keep up with demand. It began getting picked up by record stores and reaching a new type of reader, a non-comic shop reader. Eventually, publishing was taken over by Tundra, the company started by Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles co-creator Kevin Eastman, which gave it an even wider distribution. And because this was 1991, after Batman and Turtles had proven that comic book movies could be big blockbusters, every Hollywood executive was looking for the next hot comic property. And it didn't take them long to find The Crow. But O'Barr was mentored by Eastman in these negotiations and made sure that he would have creative involvement, that they wouldn't make some bloodless PG-13 version of the book. Amazingly, Hollywood agreed. The day after he got his option money, he went to the auto body shop and sold off all his tools. At the age of 32, he was finally a full-time artist. Art had finally helped him to escape the cycle of guilt and self-destruction that had dominated his life for over a decade. But sadly, the story doesn't end here. Now, the big challenge for the Crow movie was finding its star, someone who could sell both the tenderness and cruelty of Eric Draven. A lot of big names were tossed around, but the producers eventually found someone who might fit: Brandon Lee. They gave O'Barr a copy of Lee's previous movie, and while he enjoyed Lee in it, he just seemed too nice to pull off what was needed for The Crow. But he agreed to meet with him. Lee turned out to be as nice off-screen as he was on-screen, but he was also a huge fan of The Crow. He could quote lines from it, and he truly understood what made it special. Lee and O'Barr became fast friends, and O'Barr knew that Lee would fight to make a version of The Crow that was authentic to the comic. He signed off. They had their star. Miraculously, The Crow had made it into production less than 2 years after being optioned, with a team of people around it who wanted to honor the creator's original vision.
I think that the film is quite faithful to the comic book. I hope that it is, in terms of preserving that hard edge.
The soundtrack would even reflect O'Barr's own taste in music. After 28 days of filming, the movie was almost complete. Lee was in good spirits, probably because he knew this movie was finally about to make him a star, and because he was engaged to be married just a few days after production wrapped. But when it came time to shoot the climactic scene, the scene where Eric Draven is killed, there was a tragic mistake with the prop gun.
Tragedy, it seems, runs in the family. Bruce Lee was a movie star who died young and became a legend. Now his son Brandon is gone as well, fatally wounded while starring in a movie.
The film would still be completed, with Lee's stunt double taking his place in the remaining few shots. The studio would release the film, but it was a film haunted by Lee's death. What should have been his breakthrough role was instead a final tribute to a life cut tragically short. Despite, or perhaps because of this tragedy, the movie was a huge hit, and its impact even bigger. Both the film itself and the soundtrack that O'Barr had helped compile ushered in a new wave of pop culture, helping bring goth to the mainstream. But for O'Barr, all the success didn't matter. His comic had once helped him crawl out of the pit of despair over Bethany's death, but now, suddenly, his friend was dead, and he fell back in. He blamed himself for Lee's death. He wished he had never even written the comic. He re-entered his spiral of drinking, fighting, and drug use. Even as his comic became a sensation, as it was translated into a dozen languages, as it became the best-selling independent graphic novel of all time, O'Barr produced almost no new work. He would watch the movie over and over, torturing himself with the memory of his dead friend. Eventually, he traveled from Detroit to Seattle to visit Lee's grave. On Lee's grave, his fiancée had inscribed a passage from Paul Bowles' book, The Sheltering Sky, a passage that was originally intended for their wedding invitations.
Because we do not know when we will die, we get to think of life as an inexhaustible well. And yet everything happens only a certain number of times, and a very small number, really. How many more times will you remember a certain afternoon of your childhood? An afternoon that is so deeply a part of your being that you can't even conceive of your life without it. Perhaps 4 or 5 times more, perhaps not even that. How many more times will you watch the full moon rise? Perhaps 20, and yet it all seems limitless.
And it was here, at Lee's gravesite, sitting beside these words, that O'Barr finally gained closure, that he forgave himself for both Bethany and Brandon's deaths, that he finally began to value his own life. By the year 2000, he got sober, and he's since gotten married and had kids. The Crow endures because O'Barr opened himself up and bled onto the page, exposed to the world the ugly, raw emotions that we're expected to keep hidden. And just like Joy Division came for O'Barr, The Crow still comes to those that need it. It comes to say that what you're feeling is okay, that it's okay to hurt, that it's okay to be angry, that you are not alone. But it's O'Barr's life, not his comic, that sends us the final message. You will get through this. You will move on. And you will be okay. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you can really help out by liking and commenting down below. And be sure to subscribe for more comic videos soon.